Okay, so in a previous video, I went through the Argon One M.2, and what it is a Raspberry Pi case with an adapter that connects all these ports specifically for the Raspberry Pi 4, and it expands those mini HDMI ports to two full-size HDMI ports on this side, and also allows you to interface via a USB 3 and M.2 SATA drive. So don't try and connect NVMe drive here. It has to be SATA still, because that's what's supported by the USB 3 interface. And essentially how it works is it comes with this adapter, which is just a pass-through USB 3, and it connects one of the USB 3 ports to a USB 3 port on this part, which provides a SATA interface via the USB 3. So we kind of went over the hardware before, and I said I was going to do how we're going to do a software setup. So as of autumn 2020, there was a firmware release for the Raspberry Pi 4 that essentially allows you to boot the Pi off an SSD on USB, so USB boot, without relying on requiring a card inserted here. However, I do have a card inserted here, and the reason I've got that is because what I'm actually going to do is going to boot off the SD card, and then I'm going to connect my existing Astroberry USB 3 drive to one port, and I'm going to connect this SSD connector to the other USB 3 port, and then I'm essentially going to clone the disks across. And we'll do this via the command line, and see at the bottom left hand side of the screen are some of the commands that and also references to some files that will need to be altered once we've completed that clone. So the first thing we'll do is boot off, and this is just a standard Raspbian, I think it's Raspbian, install, and I have a Pi 4 power supply here, so we'll just boot that up. And I've connected a network cable here as well. So we'll just, the ping command is just saying try and reach this device. Previously it was booting up and it got this IP address, so I'm hoping that it's still going to get the same IP. Shouldn't take too long to boot. Okay, so it's responding there. So what you can do is enable VNC, and you can enable SSH. And so this would be a way of doing it if you're in the GUI. It's currently disconnected from a previous boot, but perhaps we can go in again. Can I just do real? Okay, so that doesn't do an install, so we have VNC viewer. Let's try and reconnecting here. Maybe what's my password again? Can I currently show the desktop? Interesting. What might happen is if the Pi boots up without an HDMI port connected, that it doesn't actually initiate that subsystem. So you may need to boot it up with an HDMI cable connected at the time. I disconnected all the cables before, but there is a way to do this via the GUI, but it's neither here nor there really. one word of warning: if you are using VNC and you're using the VNC that comes with Raspbian, then you need to download the real VNC client, because the standard VNC tools that come with Ubuntu and other desktop systems may not support the authentication mechanism that Pi uses by default. As you noticed, it asks for both a username and a password, and if your VNC client that you use for other hosts only supports a password as opposed to both a username and a password, then you'll need to download the real VNC client from the real VNC website in order to be able to connect. So what we'll actually do is connect on the command line. Well, most of this, there are GUI tools that you can use, but most of this needs to be done via command line type things. So the first thing that when if you've got the Pi out of the box, the first thing you should do is do a sudo apt update and a sudo apt upgrade, dist upgrade, full upgrade, just to ensure that you've got the latest and greatest on your system. And I did this recently. The next thing to check is rpi epron update. Run that and check that you have an up-to-date bootloader. If this shows that the current is not the latest, so there's be a different from that current and latest, then do a reboot and it should update. Only later versions of the firmware for the Raspberry Pi 4 support booting off an SSD card natively without an SD card being present in the system. Now, it is possible to just put a dummy SD card in that tells it, right, you're trying to boot me, actually try and boot off this USB drive. So there is a way of doing that, and I'm sure you can find a way on the web, but try and get the latest and greatest, because then you don't need that SD card. You can use it for other things. You can have a backup of your system on there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to run a tail on the syslog file, because I'm going to connect this, and what I expect to find is that it's going to say, aha, I've got a SSD, there it is, and it's been detected as SDA. So we should make a note of that, so that so new SSD equals just dev SDA. That's good. And if you remember in also a video much further back, I showed you the box. So this is the old system that this is going to be migrating to. We're also going to be using the PPB Advanced, but I am waiting on some parts that will help me mount that to the system. So this is our Samsung drive that we now boot off natively, I believe, on here. So I don't have an SD card in the old box. And we're still running that tail, and this should probably come up when I connect it in as /dev SDB, I imagine. So we'll just connect that in. And there we are. So old SSD is /dev SDB. It's a good idea just to keep a little scratch pad on the bottom somewhere on your screen with notes of things so that you can reference it, because we're going to be using these references as we go along. Okay, so we've got the disk we've booted off, which is the SD card. We've got the disk that I've been using for Astroberry, and I want to keep all my settings and basically have the new disk boot off it exactly as it was. And we've got the new M.2 SSD. So it's now a Raspberry Pi that's running 3 disks. It's quite amazing, really. And it runs them pretty fast. The SSDs are far faster. You will notice a big performance improvement. Obviously, there's a power concern, so the M2 is the lowest power SSD that's available. The SD card is obviously less performing, but probably uses less power as well. I don't know about the Samsung. I imagine it actually uses a fair amount of power. It's even got an LED on it, so I mean, which is unnecessary and not present on the M2 because obviously it's an internal disk by design. So what we need to first do is every disk has a partition table, and we need to essentially go in, check the old SSD first. I'll just run this as sudo fdisk/dev SDB. So sudo is just run this as with administrator privileges, and it may ask you for a password depending on how you've got your system configured, and that's your password, not the super user password. So let's have a look at the old SSD. So you can type M for help, and it tells you what the commands are, and we just want to print the partition table. So there is our partition table. And let's just take all this information and just put that under SDB. So copy. Let's put that in our Scratch file because it's going to be useful for us. And so let's quit. And now let's have a look at the new one. And essentially, let's run with sudo as well. So that's dev SDA. Fdisk, and the partition is empty. Also note that this disk is 447.1 gig, and the previous disk is 465.8, which means I cannot do a sector by sector copy. I can't just DD one drive to the other because the partition size will be wrong and I'll run out of space on the new drive. So what I need to do is essentially create partitions. The first one we need to make sure is exactly the same. So let's create a new partition. It's primary type. It's partition number 1. First sector. And this one, it only gives me the option of 65535 as the smallest number, which is that. And the size was 256 meg. Okay, so let's print the partition table now. Okay, so we've got slightly smaller number of sectors, but it's a matter of a few K there. Yeah, one sector, I think it's 512 bytes, so it's 4K smaller out of 256 meg. But the ID is wrong, so we want to change that. So I think that's on with the T command. Change partition type. Let's change that. And we see the ID before was C. Let's just list all the codes. C, yeah, great. FAT32. Right, so okay, so now this is starting to look similar to what SDB was looking like. So let's now create another new partition. Primary. Partition 2. We'll start off right at the beginning, and we're going to take the default to the end. So now let's print the partition table, and that's looking very similar now, isn't it? That's good. Okay, so we've modified that. There was another command after fdisk which we want to do. I think it's something like make to fs.x4, something like that. Let's just do it and use command completion to make fs.ext4 dev sd. Let's check we've got the right one. SDA2. Let's just take a copy of this before it scrolls off, because we did a copy before, so it's useful. Copy and put that under the new SSD heading. Just scroll down a bit, just make sure that we've got everything. So on SDA2, we're going to create we need a sudo, as I mentioned before. So it goes and creates that partition. Okay, so now we have a partition there. Right, okay. So what do we want to do now? Oh, right, yeah, we probably want to run this blkid. So it's only showing me the blkids of what we booted from. Can we do -a? Or can we specify? Good question. Maybe we can just do /SDA1. Right. Interesting. Okay, well, we'll leave that for a second. It may be that we need to I'll maybe have to pause the video and look that up at the end. But what we can get on with doing is copying that data. So let's create some boot folders that we can use. So let's just do disks, cd disks, make their old P1, make their old P2, make their new P1, make their new P2, and then we'll mount /dev SDB1 on old P1, and we sudo that. We sudo mount /dev SDB2 to old P2. We sudo mount /dev SDA1 to new P1. Well, that's probably because I haven't created a disk for that, a file system for it. Let's just continue and do this second one and see if that works, and probably we can just do makefs on it. Yeah, makefs dot ms-dos probably, or fat. /dev SDA1. Sudo it. And then let's try mounting that. Okay, that's good. That seems that we have everything. Let's have a look at what we've got. Let's have a look at the old ones. Old P1. Yes, that looks correct. That's like the boot partition that you get. And then new P1, sorry, old P2. And once again, that looks correct. So this isn't the file system that we're running off on the system. We're running off the SD card at the moment. But we've got the old Astroberry system and we've got the new prepared Astroberry system. And so all we need to do now is some rsync commands, and then we need to make a few modifications to the system to ensure that it boots correctly. So let's do the rsync. So AVX is the correct way to do this, and we want to do old P1.star and put that into new P1. And I didn't sudo, so let's try that. That's a lot better. So let's do ls-l on new P1 and ls-l on old P1. So they look the same. Let's just have a look at new P1/overlays. Just make sure it's done files in lower levels as well. So now we've got to do a slightly bigger one. So obviously the P2 contains more data, and this will take time. So I will actually pause the video and probably have to I'll pause the video and then we'll continue after that. But we'll set that off. You can see it's doing it. Right. So that should have completed. Yes, and it has. It took a little while longer because my Astroberry image has all the astrometry reference files for plate solving. All of them, even the ones I shouldn't really need. I also took the opportunity while that was going on to discover how I can get the partition IDs or the UUID identifiers. And the easy way to do that is by doing ls dev disk. I'll insert a -l here. And we can then do by UUID, and we can do by part UUID. So we'll take a copy of both of these. Just copy that. And as you can see, it's just got the identifiers, and then it's got this number here. So that's just saying these are the equivalents. So let's just put that in our text file right at the bottom. So we're going to look at a couple of files now on the new system. So let's have a look at our disk. So we've got new P1. Now, when the Pi boots, the first thing it looks at is this cmd line.txt. It's got a basic subsystem that can only identify fat file systems attached to it, and this is where it starts off at the boot process. And if you look at the bottom there, it says cmd line.txt is unwritable. So we need to do this with sudo. And there you can see root equals part UUID 8FEF and /02. So currently, it's booting. It's telling it that the root file system is there. Only it's not going to be, because it's going to be on a new one. Yeah, the new one is SDA. Let's check. Old SSD is SDB, new SSD, SDA. So SDA2. So we want to make a copy of this text here. Copy that. And then just go in here, remove that bit, and paste in the new one. So that's fine. The next place where we want to look is actually on the other partitions, the new P2 under etc. And this is more for use after boot and the root file system has been loaded, and we're now in Linux proper, or would be. Let's have a look at that, and you can see that it's got the old part UUIDs in there as well. And once again, I need to prepend that with sudo. The old one, which is this one, needs to be replaced with that one. Copy. So come back here. Let's just move that and paste the new one. And similarly for the line below. And I believe these are the only two places where you need to do this in the whole system. So just confirm that looks correct, and it does to me. So we've saved that as well. So now what we're going to do is we want to unmount all these file systems. Hold P1, P2. The reason there was a bit of a delay there is P2 may still be copying and flushing, syncing with like kind of write cache. So let's unmount this one. That one may take slightly longer. No, okay, and that one. So now we can get rid of all these folders, and we can get rid of that disks folder that we created. Okay, so now what we'll do, hopefully, is we'll power everything down. Give it just a minute or two to complete that power off process. Seems to have occurred. So I'm going to just disconnect the power and disconnect the two disks because I need to get in here with the Ethernet cable connected. Take that off. Remove the SD card. The micro SD card, I tend to put it in a bigger one, just so that they're very small. Don't want to lose them, so just nice sort of storage. Just put it in the bigger one. Put this back on. I'll do the screws up in a bit. Connect this correctly. That link to that. Let's apply power now. This should come up with a different IP this time around, because I think on my Astroberry I've got it hard-coded and also got it defined in DNS or in a host file. So we'll just see if that boots. It would have been a good idea. If it doesn't, I'll just make sure I've got the HDMI thing, so I may need to pause it and switch to it and see. Let's see whether it starts responding on this IP at some point, and if not, I'll pause the video and see what's happened. And there we have it. So now it's responding. So that means it's booted up, which is great. Let's get onto that, and now you see, rather than it, I've got a config in my SSH client that says if I'm connected to Indy, use the Astroberry username, and there we are. Let's also see Astroberry, I think, is better configured for headless operation. Of course, I haven't got that on here. I'm on the wrong host. Let's disconnect from SSH and let's just do download. Interesting. Yeah, we can see here. And let's enter in 172.1.72, I think it is. Now it's saying, is this the correct host? Change the password too, and there we are. So we have Astroberry running. What was running on the old box, and it's now up and running on the new one. So yeah, within VNC you could just as easily have done this from a command line there, or there are certain tools. SD card copier. If you're starting from scratch and you haven't, you're downloading the Astroberry image, which is a zip file, and you unzip it, and then it's about 7 gigs in size. So if you were, you're going to need at least an 8 gig SD to start with Astroberry. I'd recommend a 32. And if you want to move to SSD, then you would have enough space on Astroberry on the SD card to essentially image from scratch. And I think there is a tool, RSB Imager. RPi imager, probably. Yeah, an imaging utility. So if you do have enough space on a normal Raspbian installed on an SD card, so you've got Raspbian with 32 gig, or you're doing this on another Ubuntu system, or for that matter, if you go to the raspberrypi.org website, you can download the RPi imager software for Windows, or probably available for Mac as well. You have to do that, and you'd have to have something that's capable of writing to whatever your boot device is going to be. So it could be an SSD, it could be an SD card, in which case you need an SD card reader, writer. It's just another USB device. Most laptops, good laptops, will have the capability to read those cards. You might need to plug them into these larger form factor extension cards, and also check that there's a little notch on some of these that can either go towards the card or towards the connectors, and that locks the card for read-only access when it's in the position closest to the SD card. So be sure to, because you're going to be writing to it, be sure to do that. So there are a myriad of ways using that imaging utility that you can get your Astroberry up and running. Bear in mind with Raspberry Pi, if it's been on the shelf for a while or is not either in your home or in the shop, that likelihood is that it will have an old firmware, and you first need to do that apt update, apt upgrade, dist upgrade, full upgrade, whatever, to make sure. Now, I'll just do that now because they may have released some updates since I last booted the old system, and at the beginning of this video when we did this, you noticed that there weren't any packages available to install. I've just done this on this one. So there's 123 packages available to install, which just goes to prove that we are in fact running on the new system, and we'll just do that full upgrade now and allow that to happen. So I've got a whole load of new indie drivers by the looks of things that have been released, I think, over this weekend. Right, well, I'll let that continue. I hope you guys have better skies than what I have, but I am waiting. So what I've ordered, I haven't found a good way of mounting neither the Pegasus PowerBox Advance or the Raspberry Pi onto my Esprit. Now, obviously, I could just Velcro it onto the Esprit, but I don't really want to do that. I'd want to. There are on top of the tube rings. There are some screw holes that are 1/4 inch. So I've got the screws, and what I've ordered is some black perspex, which should go across here, and I should be able to get some screw holes into them. And what I'm hoping is that will give me a good platform to mount this type of equipment, and ancillary equipment, auxiliary equipment, such as the power box and the Pi, without gluing, velcroing, or actually, doing anything on the OTA that it wasn't really designed to have put on there. And also bear in mind that these give off heat. So if you velcro them to OTA, then you might cause some heat flux in there, and have some automated dew heating that might not be desirable for you. Anyway, well, thanks for listening, and as I said, I hope you have better skies than what we have forecast for the next week or two. I was very, very impressed with the first outing and only outing I've had with the Esprit. If you look on the website at Coochey.net, COOCHEY.net, you'll see my first image with the Esprit of Triangulum Galaxy M33, and I was very impressed given that the seeing conditions weren't ideal, and it was my first outing. I didn't try and do any fancy mosaic stuff. That's yet to come, but hopefully when the weather gets better. December does not look good, but January might look better. Anyway, yeah, visit the website, have a look at the picture. So just the low res one I've got up there. I intend to add to it and get some more hydrogen alpha on there as well. But yeah, enjoy. And yeah, keep watching my videos. Thank you.